appreciate you coming to this presentation of Pro Decisions. My name is Bill Briggs, and I'm a senior business consultant here at Ernest & Associates. And I have been involved in Pro Decisions since its development. So I've been working with it for, probably 5 or 6 years now. It's been around for quite a while now. I'm just going to take you through a brief PowerPoint, but we're going to spend most of our time actually looking at the product. So I hope I won't bore you to death with the PowerPoint, but I think it's important to make a little bit of an introduction to the product before we actually show it. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me just talk about first what is Pro Decisions, just from a very broad standpoint. It's a product that provides ERP system data analysis using Microsoft SQL and Excel. So you know, a lot of people like using Excel, like analyzing their data in spreadsheets, that you can just do so much with it. And so this product makes that available to you, you know, using the data from your ERP system. It's currently used by over 75 companies with those ERPs below, Fax, SX Enterprise, and TakeStock. So we have a good number of users from all three of those ERP systems. Let's talk a few minutes about how it works. If you notice in the upper left-hand corner of the screen is your ERP server, whether it be Fax, TakeStock, or SX Enterprise. The first thing that would be set up would be a series of extract programs, we call them. And these are programs that extract data from the ERP system on a regular basis, usually scheduled at night. And it is a scheduled task. So once we set it up and schedule it, it just extracts data every night off of your ERP system. Then the next thing that would happen is, and this is also an automated process, there are some scripts that are designed to import that extracted data into a SQL Server database. Now we see that in the upper right-hand corner, a SQL Server PC. That can be a separate machine, or it could be that SQL Server is installed on the same server as your host ERP system. So those could be the same server. We just have them pictured differently here. Could be the same or it could be a different server. But whatever the case, the data is then imported into SQL every night. And then what happens is your users would come in the morning and they would analyze the data using Microsoft Excel. And that data would be current as of close of business the day before, because all of this updating would have taken place the night before. So that's kind of how it works. Once it's set up, the process just happens every night on a scheduled basis, so you really don't have to think about it anymore. Now, what are some of the advantages of Pro Decisions? I think one of the key advantages is the instant visual impact of the data. Instead of just looking at reports, now we can see the information visually. A lot of times you can really spot trends, you know, looking at graphs, different types of charts, and there are a lot of different graphs and chart types available in Excel pivot tables. So that's one of the advantages. Also, you see here is an example of some exception type reporting. We're looking at salespeople that are performing below our gross profit % goal here in red. And then we see salespeople here that are performing above that goal in green. So immediately you can just take a look at a chart here and you can see that you have a number of salespeople that are not performing up to your goal. And it just pops right out at you in red here. And then here are the ones that are above. So exception reporting and visual exception reporting like this, using colors, using graphs, is a real key advantage of Pro Decisions. Also, another advantage, I think, is what I call top-down analysis. So unlike a typical report where you would just have, you know, typically a sales analysis report, you may have hundreds of pages of sales related data, and you have to go through all of those pages to be able to really find the key information. But with Pro Decisions, you can do a top-down type of analysis. So in this case, we're looking at a high level at our item classes and what our sales, gross profit, and gross profit % happens to be there. And with just a few clicks, we can drill down into specific items and then into specific customers. So we may be looking for ones that are below a certain profit % or certain ones where we're selling a certain dollar value, that sort of thing. So just by clicking into those, we can get the detail when we need it. But we're not inundated with just a huge amount of data to begin with. So I think that's another advantage, is just that top-down analysis. Another real key advantage is that we're focused on key business areas. And if you look in the green there, those are that represents the data that we're extracting out of the ERP system and building into these pivot tables. I've talked to a lot of customers over the years that have tried to get data out of their ERP and do some analysis in Excel without Pro Decisions. And typically you would use something like an ODBC connection to grab some data out. But it's kind of a difficult process, because if you want to look at sales history, you can get that from your past invoices. But then you only get customer numbers and item numbers and those types of things. You may not get related vendor information, and so you have to link to a lot of different files to be able to pull in related data. And we've already done that. So we focused on these key areas, and we've pulled all the related data into these areas as well. So you really don't have to think about it. It's all right there for you. On the left side in the blue here are some of the ones that we've added most recently. And I know there are a couple of customers on the call who already have Pro Decisions, and so these are some pivot tables and some information that we may have added since you've installed it. So that could be added to your system if you already have Pro Decisions and you don't see those. But these are some new ones that we've added most recently. Lost sales, a weekly cash flow analysis, what we call a month-to-date, year-to-date multi-compare. So you can just very quickly look at what you're doing this month compared to the same month last year, or year-to-date this year compared to year-to-date last year, in a variety of different areas, and we'll take a look at that. And then we've added a number of pivot tables for a module called the Man Rep, or the Manufacturer's Rep module. So there are a number of fax customers who have that one, and we've added it primarily for that group. But there's several pivot tables available there. Another advantage is that we've utilized industry standard Microsoft tools. So the data is stored in a SQL Server database. The advantages of that, one is it's outside of your host ERP database. So whenever you're doing this analysis, you're not impacting your day-to-day operation or your day-to-day ERP system in any way. It's also easily accessible to Excel, and also another wide range of SQL reporting tools. So most any type of reporting tool that you would find available can access a SQL database. So just having it in SQL makes it very accessible. It's also a comparatively low-cost solution for data warehousing. It's actually a no-cost solution. In probably 99% of the installations we've done, we've used SQL Express, which is a no-cost SQL that Microsoft makes available for download. And it's widely understood and supported. A lot of people work with SQL and understand SQL. As far as the analysis side, using Excel has several advantages as well. One is it's a lower cost. In most cases, people already have Excel, so you don't even have to invest in another type of analysis tool for that. It's a lower training curve because users are usually familiar with it, at least to some extent. You can also access multiple data sources from Excel. So we have a number of customers that have installed Pro Decisions, and they pull in data from their ERP using Pro Decisions, but they also can access other data sources. For instance, one that's very common is people may want to do some sort of budgeting outside of their ERP system and just put in some budgets into a spreadsheet. And we can access that spreadsheet and marry that with the actual sales history, so that then you can compare sales to budget by grabbing those two different types of data sources. And finally, it's portable. And the advantage there is if you have people that maybe are outside of your company, maybe remote salespeople that don't have access to your ERP system, you can actually take these spreadsheets and send information to them, and they can open it up as long as they have Excel and analyze that data. So it makes it very portable. Another advantage, and this is a fairly recent advantage, is there's a Microsoft Business Intelligence, Business Analytics product called Power BI. It's been available for a couple of years now, And it's really an excellent product that Microsoft has. It's a browser-based analytics, so it does not require Excel or anything to be loaded on your PC. All you have to do is have a browser. And also, it offers secure mobile access so that if you have tablets, phones that you want to see this data on, you can access it that way. And by having this data in ProDecisions in that SQL database, it is available to be integrated with Microsoft Power BI. And these are just some examples of some of the dashboards and the tiles that are designed using Power BI. And we'll take a look at a demo of that as well. We are going to be migrating what you see in the spreadsheets into Power BI so that if customers want to take advantage of that, we'll have some templates and some content already built there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get into a product demonstration now, but let me just pause for a minute and ask Tom, have there been any kinds of questions at this point that we could maybe answer?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions just yet, Bill.
Okay, good. Well, let me go ahead then and get this PowerPoint out of the way. Now, if you have ProDecisions installed, what you would normally end up with from a user standpoint are these two icons that would be installed on your screen. And one would say ProDecision Pivots, and the other would be ProDecision Dashboards. And I'll just open each one of these up and explain what's in here. It's really just a list of, this one is the pivots, just a list of all the pivot tables that are available in ProDecisions by default. So these would all be installed with your system. They are what I would call templates. So it's a starting place for you. You can take this and then you can add to it, change it, modify it in whatever way you want for your own purposes, and make multiple copies of these for different purposes. So that's a place to get started, and we'll take a look at some of these, but just be aware that if it's not set up exactly the way you want it, you can change it. You can save multiple copies. All of your copies, when you open them, they'll automatically access that SQL database and refresh their data. So, so that's kind of how this product works. You can see some of the areas, and I'll talk about this. We won't look at all of them, but we'll look at some of these. Accounts payable history is pulling off of your AP history in the system. Accounts receivable history is all of your customer payment history. Average days to pay is actually from the same data, accounts receivable history, but it's just calculating average days to pay for customers. Customer returns analysis, so that one would actually analyze the customer returns. If you wanted to look at sort of a P&L that would be based on general ledger data, you could do that, as well as looking at all the detailed general ledger data. There's several of them for inventory here, looking at aging, looking at turns, looking at value, which would be kind of like your stock status report in a spreadsheet. There is one for lost sales, so if you're recording lost sales in the system, then this is a really good reporting tool to be able to look at what are you losing sales on, for what reasons, and so forth. New customer accounts will allow you to do some analysis on what are you selling to your customers based on when they were set up in your system. So you can see, you know, the ones we've set up in the past year, how are we doing with those versus the ones we set up, you know, 2 years ago and so forth. We have several that are looking at open information, like open payables, open receivables, open purchase orders, and open sales orders. There's the purchase order history, which you can do some really nice vendor analysis with that, looking at how your vendors are fulfilling their purchase orders. There's one for sales order quotes to follow up on quoting activity in the system. Several of them that are called sales analysis, and these are all coming from your past invoice history from your sales orders and pulling that information together to do analysis on that. There's one for service level, which is looking at are you servicing your customers on time and with the quantities and products that they requested. So that's your typical service level type of analysis. There's a vendor analysis built off of this purchase order history. Warehouse transfers, so if you're transferring between warehouses, you can look at that activity, historical activity there. And then there's a weekly cash flow. So this is marrying together your open payables and your open receivables, and then looking out over the weeks to see, what's your cash flow going to look like based on those two. And then we have several for that manufacturer's rep module that I mentioned earlier that some customers have. So those are the pivots. The dashboards are built more around functional areas, and let me get some of these out of the way here. There we go. Okay, so these are the dashboards that we would have. Accounts receivable would be based around open receivables and also payment history, so that somebody who was doing a function of looking at receivables, collections, that type of thing, they could use that dashboard. There's one for a CEO, which would pull a lot of information in. We'll take a look at this one. One for general ledger, inventory, quotes and bookings, and sales analysis, and vendor performance. So let me just start with sales analysis. I'm going to open that dashboard. So when you click on this, what it'll do is, the first thing it will do is read the data, the current data in from that SQL database, and you can see that at the bottom of the screen here. So that's reading in and refreshing this data for the user. And then at that point, they're seeing here a series of predefined graphs or pivot tables, and you can see multiple tabs at the bottom. So it could be some are graphs, some are pivot tables related to that data that was just refreshed. In this case, sales analysis. So here are the gross profit percent numbers for each month, and kind of how that's been progressing, whether we've been dropping or gaining on our gross profit percents month to month, quarter to quarter. And then down below here, we see our sales dollars and gross profit dollars side by side for each year that we have history. And we can pull back, depending on how many years you have in your ERP system, we can select how many years you'd want to pull into this analysis. Over here to the side, we have something called slicers. Slicers let you look at just a slice of the data. So they're really just interactive filters that can be used to change what you see over here. So for instance, if I wanted to see for a specific branch, just what they've done in Baltimore, I can click on that branch, and you can see all these graphs change. So I can see my profitability for that branch. I can see my sales and gross profit dollars for that branch versus another branch. So it's just immediately when you click on this, you see the results for whichever one you happen to click on. You can also see multiple ones at the same time. If I hold down my control, I could say, well, let me see Baltimore and Atlanta and Charlotte together. And then you see those three branches together. Click in the upper right corner will clear it and look at everything. And so we can also do this by salesperson. So if I want to see just Christie's results, I can click on that salesperson versus Daniel's results. So it makes it very flexible by having these types of slicers installed here to very quickly see just a slice of the data. Now, as a user, I mentioned how you could take these templates and customize them and then save your own versions. Well, one thing you might want to do is change these slicers. You may want to add a slicer or take these slicers away. If you want to get rid of one, you just highlight it and hit the delete key, and then it's gone. You don't have to worry about that slicer anymore. You could also add. So to add a slicer, I would just highlight one of these graphs and then go up here to Analyze and Insert Slicer. And these are all the fields that are in that SQL database related to past invoices. And you can see there's a lot of information out here that we could make a slicer out of. But I'm just going to say, in this case, I want to have a slicer by vendor because I'm interested to see all of these results based on specific vendors. So I'll click OK. That'll drop the vendor right here in. I can position it wherever I want, change the size of it, change the formatting of it, and so forth. But now I have a slicer by vendor. So if I want to see what's my profitability, what's my sales for this All-Chem Industries, I can click on it and you can see how that changed. Now it doesn't change these others because I only had this one selected when I created this, but I could easily just go here and make report connections to these other two graphs, and now you can see all of them change when I change this vendor. So it's just that easy to add additional slicers. Now if I save this, I can just go up here to do a File Save As, and I could save it anywhere on my network. It could be on my individual PC or out on my server, and it would could just be an additional copy of this sales analysis dashboard, but now it would have this vendor name slicer on it. If I want to look at another type of analysis, I've got one for salespersons. This is the one that was in that PowerPoint. So here are my salespersons that are performing below goal, and here are the ones that are performing above goal. If I wanted to change that goal, it's just a matter of clicking on this button here. This is called a value filter, and I'm reporting anyone that's less than a certain value. Anything less than 25% gross profit percent is showing up on this graph. So if I wanted to change this and make it anyone below 30%, I could just make that change, and it would include then a lot more salespeople over here. So it's pretty easy to make those types of changes as well. Now the way this is kind of designed with these dashboards to be used is that you could spot something on a graph here that you might want to investigate further, and then we would have the pivot tables here to drill in and get to really the detailed information and investigate it further. So we may be here on the salesperson graph, and we may see a certain salesperson that has a certain margin that we want to see, and have some questions about what's going on with that salesperson. So that's where we could click on the salesperson pivot, and now we have a pivot with all of the salespeople listed here. So let's say Ron Walters was the one I wanted to focus on. Ron's at a 24.6% margin, and I'd like to see that a little bit higher. I want to see what customers, maybe what items, why is this margin lower than what I'd like to see. Well, if I click on this plus next to Ron, then it's going to expand this out into the customers that he sells to, and I can see the margins for each one of these customers. I may want to sort these, so I could just right-click on this and sort smallest to largest, and that's going to bring those customers to the top that have the lowest margins. And then I may want to see what items. Now, right now, I don't have the items in here, but it's an easy thing to add. By right-clicking, I can show this field list, and that gives me, again, this list of everything that's in that SQL database related to past invoices. And so I just need to find the items here and drag those in. So I'm going to drag that below customer name. And so now it's dropped that item information in. So these are the items that I sell to this customer. And I could even sort those by margin. So right there I can see, here's one that's a pretty good amount of sales at a 16.5% margin. So what's going on with that one? Here's another one, pretty good amount of sales at a 17% margin. So just by doing this kind of drill in and sorting, you can begin to spot some problem areas in the data. You could also do filtering based on this margin, for instance, so only show the ones that are below a certain amount to kind of get rid of those higher margin items, or only ones where sales are above a certain dollar amount, that type of thing. So you can really make some nice exception type reporting out of these and save it that way if you want to. Now in this case, again, I have these slicers here, so I may want to focus on just a certain vendor and see just the items that the customer buys from that vendor or another. So these slicers are available on the pivot tables as well, and they can be added in the same way as I added to that graph earlier. Now one thing that I hear quite a bit is that customers have to prepare some sort of sales reporting sometimes to vendors. And that's kind of difficult to do out of the standard ERP systems. You can get sales, but it's kind of difficult to get sales based on a vendor. That's something that's pretty easy to do here. So maybe I want to report on all the items that I sell from a particular vendor. So I'll just select this item pivot as a starting point. Now right now we have item classes here. So these are the different classes of items that I sell. And then if I drill down, I see below that the items, the specific items. So maybe the vendor doesn't really care about how I categorize these classes, so I can get rid of this just by right-clicking and removing the item class from this pivot table. So now I have just the items that are being sold. So the first thing I want to do is choose the vendor. So I want to produce this for all chem industries. So now I've got a vendor report of just the items from all chem industries and what I've sold. Now maybe I just want to report that for one specific year. So I can select that, and now I've got the sales just for that year. If I wanted to report maybe monthly sales, I could go over here and grab the invoice period names and make columns out of that. So now I've got every month individually what I've sold month by month. And maybe for the vendor, I don't want to show them my gross profit dollars and gross profit percent. All I need to show them is the sales. So let me go ahead and get rid of those. Okay, so I got rid of that. And now I've got a pretty nice report here showing just the items that I've sold from this vendor in this year, showing all the months of sales and the grand total over here to the side. And if I need to report on customers, I have that detail. Or if I don't need to report on customers, I wouldn't have to show that detail. But it's pretty simple to just create any type of reporting based on the sales history, just using, dragging and dropping and rearranging the data.
Bill, quick question for you. Instead of displaying price, can you show quantities in the sales by vendor?
That's a good question. Yeah, so I would just go down here and I would grab the ship quantity and pull it down as a value. And I could show it here beside, I could have quantity and sales. Or if I don't want the sales, then I would just take that out. And now I've got just the quantities. And I probably would want to format this differently. So I'll go in here and make this a number and maybe put a comma in there. And just call that ship quantity. Okay, so now I've got the quantities. So yeah, any of this data can be just grabbed and pulled in and changed. Okay, so that's the sales analysis. Let me go ahead and show you a few others of these dashboards. The AR dash is another one that we talked about. Now this would be used for collections, or some people like to provide this for their salespeople to get an idea of how their customers are paying and what's open for their customers and that kind of thing. So this one is showing total AR and the total past due over here. And then it's actually aging it out in the specific aging buckets down here below. And over here to the right are the top 15 customers that have the most past due and how much they owe. And again, if I wanted to see this just for a certain salesperson, I just click on their code, and all the numbers change to reflect only the customers that that particular salesperson is responsible for.
Bill, another question about multi-year and is one question, and another with sales analysis would be, can you break it down into states and county level reporting? Don't want to take you out of your flow.
Yeah, no problem. Can you break? The last question was, can you break it down how into days?
States or county, right? Sales analysis.
Okay.
I presume that's a Power BI thing.
Well, you can do that in here. It actually has the reporting down to the day. Let me go back and open up that sales analysis again. So if we're looking at any of these pivots here, I can go and add. We have these defined as fiscal years or fiscal dates, and the reason we do that is, and this actually is an important point that I didn't mention before, but we have the ability here to report on a calendar year basis, or if a customer has a different fiscal year from calendar, we can report on their fiscal year. And so, that's why we call them fiscal, because it could be calendar for some, but others it may not be calendar. But to see different dates, you could just grab this and pull it down here. So I've got, in this case, I'm going to grab the fiscal invoice year and pull it in, and now I've got these two different years. Let me just show sales, just to have just one column for each. Okay, so there's my years. I also have quarters, so that'll break it down into the individual quarters. I can pull down the periods, so then I've got all of the individual months. Let me get these slicers out of the way. Okay, so then I can see each month. I also have the weeks, and so this will show me, the weeks are just numbered. First week of the year, second week of the year, third, fourth, fifth, and so on. And it puts those under the appropriate month that the week would go under. And then if I wanted the days, I would pull down just the individual invoice date and drag it down here below. Now days, we're probably going to blow the number of available columns out if I add all the dates. Usually I would just add dates as rows instead of columns, but you can get right down to the day level there. I forget the first question that you asked, Tom.
It was multi-year, and then we're looking at state and county level.
Oh, state and county, yes. We have state and we have zip codes. We do not have counties. However, in Power BI, in the Power BI product, it actually has the ability to do some mapping, and we've integrated the zip codes with. There's actually tables that are available that will show what counties the various zip codes are in, and so by that integration, we could do a county analysis in Power BI. But it's not in the Standard Pro Decisions. It doesn't have county in this table, but it does have zip code and it has states. It has, I think, cities also. Yeah, we do have city, and that's based on the city that the customer or the ship to is in. Now, if you have counties, I'll just mention this because this is a good point to mention it. We have the ability to pull in user-defined fields. It's actually pulled in by default. So if you had a user-defined field for the county that the customer is in, that would be pulled in by default, and then you would have county in here. So it kind of depends on your data and if you have county in your data. Okay, sorry, Tom.
Okay, I think you addressed that question, Bill. Thank you very much. And I think you allude this when you talk about Power BI, and that's a cloud-based application, but people are asking about pushing this Excel report out to their remote personnel. So maybe you can talk about, I'm sure there's several ways of doing that actually.
Yes, and that's a very good question. There's a number of ways that different customers have done that as far as making this information available to remote users. One way is that you could set up a terminal server in your location, and you could give the remote users access to log on to that terminal server, and then the terminal server would have Excel on it, and it would have access to the SQL database. So what their users are doing essentially is they're just logging on to a server on site and then doing their analysis from that server, and that works out very well, and it gives them real-time access to the data. It's refreshed when they open up the spreadsheets and all that. We have other customers who did not want to do that. They didn't want to put in a terminal server. They just wanted to make selected pivot tables available. Like a good example would be sales analysis to the salespeople. That's all they really needed. They don't need the inventory and the past purchasing and all the other tables that we have. So in that case, you could create a sales analysis pivot table for each salesperson. And you could even filter the data so you just pull their data into their pivot table, and that would be all they would see, just their customers, the sales for their customers, and so forth. And then send that pivot table to them on a regular basis. And probably the easiest way to do that is just sign up for Dropbox accounts for the salespeople, and then just drop the pivot table into their Dropbox account, and they can pick it up whenever they want. We have a number of customers doing that. So the data would be updated every night automatically. They would just have to go pick up that spreadsheet whenever they want to see an updated spreadsheet. So does that answer the questions on that, Tom?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Bill.
Okay, good. All right, well, I'll go ahead, and then we'll pause for questions in a few minutes after I talk about a couple more of these dashboards. This one that we're on is the AR. So we looked at open AR. We also have, based on historical payment history, we have in this one. So here's how they've paid historically and what's their average days to pay overall. And then here's some customers with the days to pay that are the worst, so the most days to pay. So you get kind of a list of the customers that have paid the worst historically. And then you also have a days sales outstanding here that's calculated. And again, you have the slicers here to be able to look at it different ways. And there are pivots for both of those to get to the individual data. Let me pull up the inventory dashboard because that's a good one. This one, of course, is pulling out current inventory information as far as your total on hand. So that's your total on hand balance, your dollar balance, kind of like looking at the bottom line of your stock status report. Here it is broken out by warehouse. And what these color codes are is how old the inventory is. So in the green is the amount that you have that's 1 to 30 days old in that warehouse. And then the blue would be the amount that's 31 to 90 days old, and so on. And then in red, you see your really old inventory. So that looks at it by warehouse, and then this one here looks at it overall, combining all warehouses together. And what do you have that's current, what do you have that's old, and that kind of thing. You could look at that by vendor. So if I click on a specific vendor, then I'm going to see just my balance for that vendor in all warehouses and how old that is. So I could click on any vendor and see that. Or by item class. So if I just want to see, auto cleaner, what do I have? And here's the amounts that I have in the different warehouses of that item class. Then we have inventory turns. So how's our inventory turning by warehouse, by item class? Inventory adjustments look at historical adjustments that have been made. So I could look at any year, I could look at any quarter, I could see what the dollar value is of those inventory adjustments. And I could also see it by inventory adjustment code. So depending on the code you used in the ERP when you made that adjustment, then I could also filter on that. So what was adjusted because of damaged goods, or what was adjusted because of physical discrepancy, that kind of thing. We have here something called a turn earn index. And if you mouse over this, it actually pops up and explains about this in case you're not familiar with the turn earn index. But essentially what it's doing is taking your gross margin amount times your turns. And so the idea here would be that if you have items where you make a higher margin, you don't necessarily have to turn it as much to make the same overall profitability as those items with a lower margin. You'd have to turn them over a lot more to make the profitability there. So it kind of takes those two factors and then gives you an index based on that. And then you can compare item to item what's your profitability. And this one is setting goals on that. So here's the ones that are below the goal. Here's the ones that are above our goal using the turn earn index. It's very similar to the GMROI type of analysis, but looking at it a little bit differently. This next one is just a pivot based on the aging. So we can see here if we wanted to drill in and see for this particular class of items, here's all the individual products. And here's how much we have in each of these periods. So if we want to see, what do we have that's over 12 months old, we could sort it. Well, let me sort it the other way by largest. Okay, so here are my items where I have, the most on hand that's over 12 months old in this particular class of items. And then there's pivots for all of that other information that we looked at on the graphs. Okay, let me drill into one more here, and then we'll take a couple more questions. Vendor performance. This one's based on past purchase order history. And here we can do things like looking at what are our worst vendors based on their lead times, and which ones have the shortest lead times. And then which ones are late, which ones are meeting their promise dates. So that type of side-by-side analysis of your vendors. This one's looking at number of back orders that they're having to ship. So are they able to fulfill their purchase orders completely on the first shipment, or do they have to carry a lot of back orders to fulfill those purchase orders? And so this analyzes your vendors based on that. This one's looking at purchase history, how much have you purchased from these vendors, and also by warehouse and by item class. And then I think this performance pivot is really nice. This one puts it kind of all here in one nice little pivot table, looking at a specific vendor. What's the number of POs that you've placed with them? What's the dollar value of that? What's their average days late? What's their average lead time? And then what's their average number of receipts per PO? And what's the percent of POs shipped complete? So you can kind of compare all your vendors on any of these factors. Tom, have there been any questions about any of those dashboards?
No, I think you're doing fine, Bill. Thank you.
Okay. All right, I'd like to show you one more pivot here, and then I'm going to jump over to Power BI just to give you an idea of what that looks like. But let me pull up here a sales analysis, and this is a month-to-date, year-to-date multi-comparison. So here we're looking at our sales and gross profit and gross profit percent, so those three metrics. And we have columns under each one of those. This is showing the sales dollars month-to-date, and then this one is showing it compared to month-to-date last year, so looking at the same month last year. And then what is the growth percent, looking at this month versus same month last year. And unfortunately my demo data doesn't have this month last year, but normally we'd see, what is the difference between those two. And then here's our sales year-to-date and sales year-to-date last year, and then the difference between those. And we see the same information on gross profit and gross profit percent. Now this is showing it by branch, so we can compare branch to branch there. But we could also look at it by customer here. Same information, but just looking at it customer to customer. And a good use of this might be just to sort this on what your growth has been, and looking at customers where we're having negative growth or customers where we're having really good positive growth, depending on what you're searching for. This is customer classes. So how are we doing with the different classes of customers? These are specific items, and then item classes. And then this one breaking it down by state, and this one by salesperson. So just a real nice comparison of different time periods based on all of these factors. Okay, let me go ahead and show you the Power BI, which would be something that would be available as a kind of an add-on to this if desired. And the way Power BI works is I'm going to go to my browser here, and I'm just going to click on my Microsoft Office portal, and that's where you would find Power BI. If you're already using Microsoft Office, then you would just see it there listed with the other applications under Microsoft Office. Let me try that again. For some reason, that's not opening up. There we go. So under Office 365, if you're familiar with it, this is where you could have your mail and your Word and Excel and PowerPoint and all those applications. If you didn't have Office 365, but you had Power BI, then you would just see this one icon here for Power BI. But if you click on that, then it takes you into it. And here's where you could have your dashboard. So this is one that I have built, just looking at some gauges and looking to see just immediately, are we meeting goals in certain areas. So you could have that type of dashboard set up based upon your sales analysis in Pro Decisions. Another one that I think is nice is this one's called a territory dashboard. So this is just looking at different statistics for a salesperson. So you could make this available for your salesperson, and then they could pull it up at any point, and they could see, what's their total sales for all customers. And this is looking at the last 12 months. And then what's your gross profit percent, your gross profit dollars, and how many customers does that represent? And then this particular customer has our customer stratification product, so they can see their core customers and what's the dollar sales to just that group of customers, just their core. And what kind of margin are they making on their core customers versus their opportunistic customers, and what's the margins there. and their service drains and their marginals and so forth. They can also see at the bottom their small customers and their new customers. But just a way to take relevant information from that data that we just saw in Pro Decisions, but make it available in kind of a graphical or a tile-based dashboard format and through a browser. Now, if you had this on a tablet or on a phone, it formats really nicely for those types of devices. Obviously, like on a phone, you wouldn't see this large picture all at once. What it does is it kind of tiles these for you on your phone, and you just kind of scroll down and you see the different tiles, depending on how much it can fit on each screen at a time. So it can decide that based on the real estate that it has to work with. Another dashboard we have, we've called profitability trends here. So again, kind of looking at sales dollars, gross profit dollars, and so forth, but then looking at what kind of trends we see. So this one is sales dollars, looking at in the blue here every month for the last 12 months, and then in the yellow beside that, every month for the 12 months before that. So we can see what we sold in July versus what we sold in July the year before, what we sold in June versus June the year before, and so forth, and kind of spot if we have trends going on there that are positive or negative. This is the one I told you that is available as kind of a map in Power BI. So this is showing sales based on where it occurred. And if you drill into this, you can actually then scroll down and get further back, or you can zoom in further in. And here we can see specifically where those sales are occurring. And if you highlight a specific area, it'll pop up and tell you, where exactly is that located, but then what's the sales dollar amount there, what's your gross margin percent there. If you click on it, it actually shows over to the side here how many core customers does that represent, how many different types of customers, and it shows you up here above what's the sales dollars or gross margin and gross margin percent for just that particular zip code. These are all zip codes. This zip code has 4 customers, and here's the sales into that zip code, and so forth. So that's kind of a nice tool if you really want to focus in on where your sales are occurring. Okay, Tom, let me go ahead and take questions at this point. And I think what I'll do is just pull up also this PowerPoint, which will have my contact information on it.
Okay. And we actually had somebody who jumped on maybe a couple minutes into the presentation and was asking about the hardware configuration.
Okay, sure. Well, since I'm on this PowerPoint, let me just jump back to that slide. We'll just illustrate that again. So here's kind of the hardware configuration. A typical hardware configuration. It could actually vary a little bit, but typically you'd have your ERP server here, and what we do there is we install some programs on that server that extracts data out of the ERP system, and it's scheduled to happen every night. So we would just install some programs on your existing server for that. Then you would also need to have a SQL server, and your SQL server could be a separate machine, or you could install your SQL Server database on your same server as the ERP system is installed. It just depends on what kind of capacity you have there and if it's able to accept an additional application like that or not. And it does have to be a Windows machine as well. So SQL Server has to be installed on a Windows machine. So we install that. We install some scripts there that would import this extracted data into a database, and that happens every night as well. And then the only other hardware would just be individual users' PCs with Excel. And it does require Excel 2010 or later to be able to make use of all the slicers that we have. That's when the slicer capability was introduced, was in Excel 2010. So as long as your user has Excel 2010, then they can analyze this data on their PC. I will mention that Excel 24-bit version, there is a difference there's a 32-bit version and there's a 64-bit version. The 64-bit version can handle more memory. So if you have very large amounts of data sales analysis typically can have for some customers, then the 64-bit version is recommended for Excel. It'll work better with those large data sets.
Okay, thank you, Bill. And
okay.
I have a question about sales data.
Okay.
And do you key to the salesperson on the invoice or the salesperson assigned to the customer contact?
That's a very good question. Yes, what we do is we key to all of the salespeople. So when we extract a past invoice out of sales history, we look at the salesperson that's on the header of that invoice, whoever was entered on that invoice, and we just call that the salesperson for the invoice. Then we also look at the salesperson that the customer on that invoice is assigned to in the customer maintenance. And we pull that salesperson in and we call that the AR salesperson. So that's the salesperson that the customer is assigned to. Then we also have an inside salesperson that's available on invoices, and so we pull that inside salesperson. That would usually be the order taker or the person that actually entered that order. And then finally, you could split invoices among multiple salespeople in the ERP system, and so we have what's called a second salesperson, which would be if you had a split, that would be the other salesperson that's associated with the invoice. So the answer to that question is we have all the salespeople that are potentially associated with that invoice and that customer pulled into the database.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, well, if there are no further questions, then I appreciate everyone's attendance. And as I mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. There's my email and phone number there. And I'd be happy to take any questions that you have if you think of something later. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody for attending. And as I said, we'll send out a recording so that you can share it with other people in your organization. Thanks a lot, Bill, and thank you, everybody.